When I start inking a sketch, I tend to start with the eyes and the nose. Once those parts are done on an animal drawing, the rest of it tends to fall into place for me, so I focus on them first. I'm not a fan of using thicker brushes when inking spots that would have bigger line weight, so instead I like to carve it in with the brush at the size it came in, and then erase away to help finish the shape. I find that gives me more control. I'm not a big fan of doing the Control Z and undoing a bunch of a piece to redo it. Instead, I like to erase it and then use some of what is there to help fix what I think is a problem. It saves me a lot more time than redrawing the whole thing over again, but I do that sometimes too. Another thing I'll do is, instead of redrawing whole lines, I'll just erase parts that are not as squiggly and try to straighten them out to save me time. Sometimes the best way to get the stroke that you want really is to just draw it several times to get that ideal arch or line weight that you're going for. Sometimes while the sketch looks fine, when it's inked it looks a bit odd, and then I'll redo it. This tooth looked a bit too big after it was inked, so I made it smaller. When doing eyes, I either draw them stroke by stroke or I try to do it in one big loop like that. It depends. Something about this eye was bothering me, so I did a little line to try and figure out the roundness for the iris in it to match. I tried to add little stress lines to his eyes to further emphasize how scared he is of the bee on his nose. I wound up not liking that, so removed it in the end. Eyebrows in 2D styles of cartoon animals, I've noticed, are either vaguely triangular in shape, vaguely rectangular in shape, or they're crescent moons of varying thickness and not much variance in between, I've noticed. He's got really subtle tufts on his cheeks by where his ear meets his head, and it was hard to not make it look too puffy here. I didn't really like how this cheek looked a bit thick, so I wound up editing it. The lasso tool saved me time, as it let me move the lines I had drawn over a bit, instead of me erasing it and drawing it all over again. Mostly erasing these lines leading up to the top of the head just to smooth it out and then lead into that other eyebrow. I liked the way that eyebrow came out, so I edited that one to match it more. Something I noticed with the way lions have their ears in The Lion King, especially as cubs, is that the inside of the ear is super round. So if the angle is a bit off, it can be really noticeable, and I was kind of particular about that when inking this. The curve here was really important for me to get right, because it just didn't look correct at first. It was around this time I noticed the layer panel was being covered up by the extra canvas window in OBS, so I popped it out and moved it to the side so it would be more visible. I don't worry about how messy tufts of fur or hair like this looks when inking. I focus more on the strokes and making them smooth. Then once they're drawn in, I just erase what I don't need or redraw what isn't correct. I wound up not liking the way that this tuft was, so I spent a bit more time fiddling with it to get the arch that I wanted. Something I've been doing that I'm sure you've noticed so far is how often I'm rotating the canvas. I found trying to stay at a static angle to really hurt my wrist and my arm, while rotating the canvas like it's a piece of paper actually minimizes that pain and helps me draw lines cleaner and with less issue. So I started doing that a lot. It's kind of like how you're left-handed or you're right-handed. There's a certain angle that you might just have a better time drawing a line from smoothly, so I rotate the canvas a lot to try and meet that angle that I'm good with. The still canvas on the screen is what I use to keep track of the whole piece while I draw, since I rotate so much. I'm assuming you've guessed by now that this is an original Lion King character. His name is Kojo. He is a smart and gentle boy, but also a somewhat timid boy. He really doesn't like bugs or anything that may be similarly scary. So the concept behind this art is he's napping in a dandelion field and wakes up to this queen bee on his nose. And he's not exactly sure how to react because, one, it's a queen, and two, it's a bug that's a queen. So it's two things he is not ready for in the slightest, which is why he looks so freaked out. His design is also super cute. I bought him off of Malice TLK on DeviantArt. They make really, really nice designs. If you ever are interested in that, you should definitely check them out. They make such good art. I found fur tufts like this are easier to do with the short strokes that just crisscross like that. Legs are my favorite thing to ink on animals because they're usually just straight lines. It's so relaxing. Originally I had drawn his paws a bit more splayed with his claws out to try and make him look even more scared, but that wound up looking a bit weird and too busy compared to his face, which I wanted to be the focus. So I wound up redoing the paws and making them the round toe beans. This elbow is touching the ground, so I made that one tuft super sharp and flat to try and emphasize that. I'm going back to a couple spots that were completed earlier, like getting rid of the eyebrow that's hidden by his mane, and erasing some of the line on the head to connect that ear to the rest of his skull. Stuff like that can really make the difference. More crisscrossy fur tufts. This time it goes a little bit faster because I'm starting to pick up a rhythm. I was originally trying to be careful about not moving too fast for when the playback got sped up for this video. Long, smooth strokes are really good for certain parts compared to short ones. They carry a weight and a finality that can be seen when added with the rest of the line art. I remember being weirdly impressed with this paw because of how quickly I managed to ink it. I was expecting to spend a lot of time fussing over it, since toes on paws are a thing that I'm not as good at, and stylized Lion King paws are something I always struggle with. I'm used to drawing really fluffy wolf tails and not so much smooth lion tails, so this took me a minute. The thing about Lion King tails is it gets really thin around the tip before the tuft, and that never looks right to me, so I try to find something in the middle ground that is ideal for me, but also fits with the style. I didn't have the tuft of the tail completely figured out in the sketch, so I had to puzzle it out once I got to it here with the inks. I lowered the opacity of the rest of the ink layer so I could see which was tail and which was not tail. I remember considering redoing the tail tip so it's puffed up like a scared kitten would be, and deciding against it because it would take too long to figure out. Erasing the parts we won't need on the lines because it'll be covered up. And then we move on to the bee. I actually accidentally clicked the stream button when originally inking the bee, so I had to redo it because it didn't get recorded. The reference I used was of a queen bumblebee, mostly for the body and wings since it's so small extra detail would be a waste. I originally was going to cut this part out of the video, but I decided to leave it in anyway. I didn't have the legs sketched to draw, so I tried to add them in for better placement of the bee. They wound up not working out very well, so I eventually gave up and stuck with the wings instead. I did give it one final shot though before truly giving up on it. And that is it. The inks are complete. I do have the rest of this recorded from coloring to completion, but that's proving a bit too hard to edit, so I don't think I'll be uploading it. However, if this is something that you guys find interesting, I can look into making more typical speed paints that maybe record the still canvas I usually have on my other monitor instead of my main screen that is rotating a lot and thus impossible to make any faster without giving you motion sickness. If y'all would be interested, just let me know and I'll look into it. See ya!